Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Chess 9LX event, which is happening here in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, as many of you know, Chess 9LX is commonly referred to as Fischer random chess. What that means is that you rearrange the pieces on the back rank, and there are 960 unique different setups. So, of course, 9LX, LX, Roman numerals equals 960. Now, this event here in St. Louis, very prestigious. You have some very strong players, including Fabiano Caruana, Levon Aronian, and of course, the former world chess champion and the inventor of the game of chess, Garry Kasparov, who is commonly thought of as one of the two greatest players in the entire history of the game. So, today, day number one, there are 9 games. You play everybody one time, but most importantly, today in the second round, I was playing against Garry Kasparov himself, the second greatest player of all time. So, first round of the day, I drew a game against Ray Robson. Now, before we jump into the action, this event is also very unique in that because it is Chess 960, the players receive the position about 15 minutes before the game, and you do not get any computer assistance. You have to figure it out at the board. No help whatsoever. Now, I have played quite a few Fischer random events in the past, so I am used to it, but nonetheless, it is always a unique experience. Now, fortunately for me, Garry Kasparov himself actually wanted to analyze with me before the games because his usual sparring partner for this event, Peter Savitler, was unable to compete. So, anyway, second round of the day, after drawing Ray Robson in game number 1, I paired against Garry Kasparov with the black pieces. Now, as you will notice, all the pieces are on different squares to begin with. So this game starts with the move c4 from Garry, and I play this move c5 here, trying essentially to follow some of the basic principles of development. Now, one of the things that's very critical, whether it's regular chess or whether it's Fischer random, is that you play for the center of the board. Now, the thing is, in Fischer random, because the queen, the rook, and the bishop and the knights are all in different squares, you sometimes aren't sure which pawn to push. Now, from my general read of Fischer random, what you generally try to avoid are situations where, say, you play d4 on move 1, black can go c5, trying to open up the c file right away and get activity. And if white plays something like d5, maybe there's b5 here, putting pressure on the pawn on d5 here. And actually, computer thinks that black is already quite a bit better. So generally, the basic rule is try to take the center, but you want to see which pawns can be guarded and so forth. So c4 here, a very explosive move from Garry, trying, of course, to push the pawn, which is protected by a rook. Now, it's not always true that you push a pawn in the center where you have a rook or a queen behind it, but oftentimes I do find that in Fischer random, this is probably the most critical skill. So, Garry plays c4, I play c5 here, trying to mirror the pawn structure, and now he plays move knight f3, and I go knight to f6, and now he plays his move b3. Now, sometimes when you play Fischer random, you can mirror your opponent's moves with c4 and c5, trying to be symmetrical. Sometimes you cannot do that, as in one of my other games today, but nonetheless, in this game, it starts off pretty dry. So you get b3. I play the move knight to c6 here. Now, this is a move that actually, in retrospect, I think was a mistake. And it's funny because before this game, since I was not able to analyze with Garry, since we're playing against each other, I actually was looking at this with Wesley So and Samuel Sevian, two great American chess players. And in the analysis before the game, we actually felt that white should never play knight c3, because if white plays knight c3, for example, say black were to castle, white can never really play d4 trying to build a big white center, because after takes, and rook takes c4, white is simply down a pawn. So we felt that white cannot play for knight c3, so we felt that white should probably play e3 and d4. And unfortunately for me, after b3 knight 6 is played, I realized here that after e3, now I have the same problem, which is I try to play d5 here. After takes, now suddenly the pawn on c5 is hanging, and I'm just down a pawn for nothing. So I think that knight c6 is maybe a mistake if I'm looking at this from a very sort of abstract concept. Probably I don't put the knight here because here I can maybe go d5, maybe knight e6 and d5, but probably this move is a mistake because I cannot build the patented big black center. So after knight c6, Garry plays e3, trying to build the big white center here, and now I play the move b6, and Garry decides to castle, and here I decide to castle in return. Now, in this position, Garry, I believe, was saying something like after b6, maybe there was this move d4, and after something I want to say like, maybe it was takes, and d5, if white castle, there was something I think he was worried about with like g5 and maybe g4 somewhere. He mentioned this after the game. I maybe have the wrong position, but he was mentioning something with an early g5. At any rate, here after b6, Garry castles, and now I decide to castle. Now, I spent quite a bit of time on this move because it's a really critical situation here. What I wanted to play was this move d5, but it's very tricky in Fischer random because when you try to play for tactics in the opening, if you're not castling, you're not 100% sure about the piece placement, you can end up in trouble very quickly. Now, the reason I didn't play d5 is I thought that if Gary were to trade and play d4, trying to attack on the c file here, I thought that after takes knight takes d4, it looked really scary due to this pin, combined with the fact that white has bishop to e4, putting pressure on D's knights. So I was a little bit worried here, and if you're not sure in Fischer Random, it's very tricky, because if you play one wrong move, you can just lose the game without it even turning into a fight. So instead, I decided castle being traditional. Gary plays d4 here. We trade, and now I play this move d5, trying to stop white from playing d5. If I were to play a move like d6 after d5 here, white has this massive connect 4 combined with D's diagonals for D's bishops, and white is doing very, very well here. In fact, I think white has a big advantage, and white might even just be winning. So you have to be very careful. So I play d5 here. Gary goes knight e3, and now I play e6, trying to protect the pawn here. And now Gary spent a lot of time. Now, some of you will know that these games are not being relayed on chess.com or Lichess. So because of that, we don't actually have the timestamps for this game. But at this moment in time, I remember very clearly, we were playing a 20-minute game with a 5-second increment, but Gary had something like, I want to say 15 or 16 minutes. I was down to maybe 12 minutes, and Gary used a lot of time here. I believe he used about 8 or 9 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, before deciding to trade the pawns on d5. Now, Gary is a very classic player. He likes to look for the absolute best move in every single position. That is why he was such a great world champion. But here, he's not able to really find the way forward, and he ends up trading the pawns. Now, I was expecting him to trade the pawns here, and after knight takes d5, I thought he would maybe play something like knight e5, or maybe takes knight e5, something along these lines. But Gary spent a lot of time here, because I think, as you've seen in many of my streams, he was feeling the je ne sais quoi. And what I mean by that is Gary likes to do this gesture with the hands. It's like you're sensing something, basically. It's not like the money, but you're basically, you sense it. You can sniff, you can smell something. You feel like something is off here, and he could sense that he's better intuitively. So he's really looking for a way to build upon the advantage that he could sense that he had, but he wasn't able to find. Now, the computer does think that white is a little bit better here, but there's nothing concrete and nothing conclusive. So Gary spends a lot of time trading. Now, this is one of the drawbacks with Gary getting older, not playing so much chess anymore, is that sometimes when the intuition is off, you spend too much time looking for the right moves, and you get in a little bit of a hole on the clock. So Gary decides to trade the pawns. He trades knights, and now he goes bishop d2 here. I play bishop d7, and we actually have a very sort of static position here. Other than knights being on f3 and c6, for example, both of these bishops are coming to the center of the board. We have rooks on the c file. We have the exact same pawn structure. It is a complete mirror right here. And so for that reason, even though white has a small advantage, it's not all that special. So I go bishop d7. Gary plays h3 here to stop bishop to g4. Now I play rook e8. He goes bishop d3, and now I play bishop d6, simply lining up all the bishops on these critical d2, d3, and d6, d7 squares. Here, Gary plays queen to b1, targeting the pawn on h7, and now I play this move h6, avoiding hanging the pawn. Gary plays b4, and now I go queen b8. Now, already here, I felt like Gary's advantage was gone. I want to say, about like 6 or 7 minutes to Gary's 3 minutes, but I still felt that there was a little bit of danger here, because the d5 pawn is a little bit weaker than the d4 pawn, A, because white can kick the knight away from c6, which targets the pawn, and secondly, you have queen b3 to hit the pawn on d5. So Gary plays queen b3. Now, I think this was a mistake here. I felt like at this point in time already, maybe Gary should have played check on h7, the tickle check. And after king h8, bishop f5, I thought that maybe he could still have a small advantage, because now the king is 1 square away from the center in the endgame down the road. Instead, he plays queen b3, and now after bishop f4, I'm starting to feel very comfortable, because now with a set of bishops coming off the board, I shouldn't really have all that many difficulties. So here, Gary plays queen b2 after a bit of a think. You're probably wondering, why couldn't Gary trade the bishops and take the pawn here? But if you were to play this, even though white is temporarily up a pawn, I have bishop e6 attacking the queen, and now white really can't guard both the pawns on d4 and b4. If white plays queen b5, I can simply trade on d4, and now we have an even number of pawns. Probably still a draw with perfect play, but only black can try to win, because the light square bishop targets all of white's pawns, whereas his bishop targets nothing but air. So in this position, Gary plays queen b2. We trade the bishops. I go queen d6, targeting the pawn on b4. And now he plays this move b5. I go knight to a5. And now he plays knight e5, trying to get a nice little bastion here in the center of the board. And it's actually a bit of an issue, because I can't really play f6 here, because after takes, there are all these weaknesses on the light squares after queen f4. And I'm not sure if white is actually winning here, but it's very, very hard to play for black. So instead, I play the move knight to c4, and this is a move that is a very Magnusian. I don't know if there's a better way of putting it, but this is one of these moves that Magnus Carlsen, the former five-time world champion, would play. And this is also why I know that Garry Kasparov would be very frustrated if he tried to play chess today. As soon as I played knight to c4, I saw Garry look up, and he gave me this look. I guess I'll open OBS so you guys can see my reaction. But he basically looked up like this. He looked up like this at me, essentially. He looked like this. And it was this look of like, what are you doing? You just blunder. Now, knight c4 does sacrifice a pawn, but it's a very practical solution to the issues I have here. In this position, white has a great knight here. I have a knight on the rim. He's got a great bishop on d3 that targets great diagonals. My bishop isn't really doing a whole lot. So when I play knight c4, Garry takes, I take back, and he takes with the rook here. If white were to take with the bishop, I could sack the rook with the rook takes c4, and after rook c4, bishop b5, white will end up losing the rook back here, and black is completely fine. Probably something like trade, bishop f1, king f1, and with even pawns on the board, this should be a draw. So Garry, of course, takes with the rook here, and temporarily in this position after rook d, white is up a pawn here. But the problem in this position is that white's extra pawn is this blockaded d pawn. And again, it's not really very easy to guard this pawn and or play on the files here. You notice that the rook guards the pawn on d4, so it's very hard to go rook c1 or rook c7 with the kebab. I guess here it works, but let's just say I were to get this, say you take queen d4, suddenly white's in some trouble here. And so you can't really use the c file with the double stack, and if you can't use the double stack into the kebab, and you also can't really contest the e file, objectively this should be a draw. So already here after rook c d8, I thought maybe I would offer Garry a draw, but then I decided not to offer him a draw because I felt it would be a little bit disrespectful. Now, the reason that I thought that it would be a little bit disrespectful, I mean, besides the fact that it's Garry Kasparov, is that in this position, first of all, the fans want to see us play the games out all the way, but secondarily, white is the one trying to win here, and offering a draw to Garry in a position where he's a little bit better, and he's obviously not going to take the draw, it just didn't feel right. So after rook d8, he plays rook c2, and now I play bishop e6. I do not grab his pawn on d4, because then there's a classic Exxon fossil with bishop to h7 check, and after king takes bishop, I lose the queen, and I lose the game. So I play bishop to e6 here. Now I'm threatening to capture the pawn, because after, say, a4, queen d4, the rook will guard the queen at the end of this bishop h7 move, and it's no longer a fossil. So after bishop e6, Garry plays rook to d1. I play bishop to d5. Here, of course, again, queen d4 would lose the game because at the end of this exchange, white has two rooks versus a rook and a bishop. So I go bishop d5, creating the classic wooden shield, targeting the pawns on a2, g2, guarding the pawn on f7, and having the a8 diagonal. And it's very, very hard for white to play. Now, the other thing is around this point in the game, Garry was down to maybe 1 minute on the clock, and he was very visibly frustrated by the position. And the reason that Garry was so frustrated here is because he knew he was up a pawn, but white can't really make progress or prove any kind of serious advantage. And this is also why I would say that if Garry were to play chess nowadays, obviously we can't compare generations, but Garry would be very frustrated playing against somebody like Magnus, because this game illustrates essentially what Magnus does better than anyone else in the world, which is whenever he's in trouble, which is very, very few and far between in terms of games, he finds ways to simplify into endgames where generally he might be down a pawn, maybe a little bit worse, but practically speaking, it's impossible to try and win the game. Now, maybe I didn't phrase that exactly right, but the point is that here, it's very, very hard for white to win this game, even though white has the extra pawn. And I can tell you, based on my own personal experience, that Garry would probably have a lot of difficulty playing against Magnus, because Magnus would be able to do this whenever he's in trouble, where he can simplify, create these endgames where it's very, very, very drawish, even though you have an extra pawn and you get no chance. Now, one game in particular that I would refer to when I talk about this, or I'm referring to experiences, there was a game that Magnus played, I believe, in the London Chess Classic, maybe in 2010 or 2011. It was in a Botvinnik English where white went c4, e4. Magnus was black. He lost pawn on the queen side, but he was able to draw it very easily. And also a game that Magnus and Kramnik played, I believe, in the candidates in 2014, where Kramnik played a Catalan. I think he was up a pawn, but Magnus very easily forced an endgame with rooks and bishops on the board and drew it, even though he was down a pawn in that game as well. So, back to the game, anecdotes aside, Garry was getting very frustrated here. Again, I thought about offering a draw, but feared no reason to. So he goes bishop f1, I play rook e7, goes queen c1, and now I go rook d7. I have the classic triple stack here on the d file. The idea is I want to simply move the bishop, move the queen, and then eat the pawn on d4. So Garry plays queen e3, I go queen to b4, he goes rook dc1, trying to line up the double stack on the c file and infiltrate. I go bishop e6, we get rook c8, queen d4, we get the trade, and now Gary trades the queens. Now at this point, I had about 5 minutes to Gary's 30 seconds here, and I would say in any normal world, I should win at this point. So Gary goes a3, I play rook a4, targeting the pawn on a3, we get rook c3, king f8, f3, king e7, king f2, and now I play this move g5 here to try and fix these pawns on the light squares. Now, probably here I should have gone king d6 first to get the king 1 square closer towards the c file so that I can go after the pawn on b5. But alas, I played g5. Gary goes rook d3, rook c4, king e3, and now I play this move f5. Here, Gary goes g3, and now I play this move rook to c1. Now, this move is a terrible, terrible move by me. What I should have played here was this move f4, and the reason is actually quite straightforward. After pawn takes, rook takes, all of these white pawns are on the same color as my bishop, while all of my pawns are on the opposite color, and this bishop on f1 will always be glued to the f1 square, guarding the pawn on h3. Now, this is not winning on the spot or anything. Maybe after rook d4, it's still a draw, but after trading king f6, again, all these pawns can be targeted by my bishop. My pawns are on the opposite color, and I do think it would be very, very difficult to save the game. At any rate, I play rook c1 here. Now, again, to give you an idea of the time, I have about 3.5 minutes to Gary's, I want to say, maybe 10 seconds here. He plays bishop e2, and now I play this move rook c2, which is simply a bad move. What I should have played here was probably rook to h1, but the reason I did not play rook h1 here is because I felt that after rook to d4 in this position, rook h3, rook a4, takes, rook a7, king d6, and rook b7, suddenly white is getting counterplay here. You might win the pawn on b6, and even if Gary is slow, he's not playing as much, these moves are still very obvious and very straightforward, and he would find them in a split second. So instead I play rook c2, he goes f4 here, and now it's probably close to a draw due to a very nice idea. So he plays f4 here, and I spent a lot of time, I think I spent about 2.5 minutes here before trading the pawns on f4. I was trying to figure out if this endgame that I went into was a draw or not. At the end of the day, once f4 occurs here, I couldn't find a better way to play this, because after takes, if I don't play this move bishop c4 here, now the pawns, let's just say we get this position, pawns are on dark squares on the queen side, the rook cuts off the king infiltration, and I really don't have any way to improve the position. And that's exactly why it was so critical to play this f4 move here to fix the pawns on the light squares, very specifically this pawn on f3 and h3, because g5 covers them both. Alas, I didn't do it. So let's get back to the game. So we get f4, we get the trade. I play this move bishop c4, rook d2, I swap everything down, and on first glance in this position after king c5, it looks like I'm winning here because the pawn on b5 is going to fall if you don't guard it with a4. But if white plays a4 here, I play this very counterintuitive move, king d5. King b4 looks like the obvious move here, but after king d4 takes, king e5 takes. After a5, not king f6, king g6, a4 f5, a3 f6, a2 f7, a1 queen, f8 queen. White is still in the game and probably should draw. But after king c5, Gary correctly plays this move king c3 because, as I was saying, a4, king d5, we have a classic zugzwang after h4, h5 here. The white king must yield. If you go to c3, I go king e4, takes, king d5, king g3, and the black pawn is simply way too fast here getting down the board, and I will win the game. And if white plays this move, if white goes king e3, then I go king c4. You have to yield with king f3, king b4, king e3 takes here. And again, the white pawn is way too slow here getting down the board. Black queens first. After f7, queen h8, you simply stop the pawn from queening and you win the game. But Gary, even if he is not as sharp as he once was, he still can calculate, and he plays this move king c3 instantly, and this move saves the draw. And the reason is because now after I play h5, h4, if I go king d5, king d3, I don't have any moves to make white have to yield, and so I just have to simply keep going back and forth, and the game ends in a draw. So I decide to take. Gary plays king d4, king a4, king e5, I play b5, takes, and he plays this move king e5. Now, a funny anecdote, for those of you guys who weren't watching this live, since of course chess.com and Lead Chess refused to cover this event, even though it has top players, is that Garry Kasparov during this moment, as he was thinking, he started using his hands. He went like this, with his hands basically as though he's calculating, almost like I want to say Mickey Mouse in Fantasia. I think it's Fantasia. There's a Mickey Mouse movie where Mickey is like literally moving his hands as though it's music, and Gary literally was moving his hands as though he was like Mickey Mouse in this situation. At any rate, those of you guys who did see it live on broadcast, you'll know what I'm talking about. Those of you guys who didn't, just giving you a nice little story from the game. So he started moving his hands all over. Ray Robson, who was actually watching the game live, almost burst out laughing as he saw it happening. But Gary, for whatever his magic with his hands was, he found the best move in this position, which was this move king to e5 here. it is the best move by far. Now, maybe it's still a draw after a move like king e6, but the problem with a move like king e6 after b4, f5, b3, f6, b2, f7, b1, queen, f8, queen, queen, b4, is that white cannot take the pawn on h6, so after queen to b6 check, you will lose the queen on h6 here. If you try to check on f3, I can interpose with queen b3, checking the king, and you have to trade the queens, and then you lose the game because the a pawn goes right down the board. So Garry plays king e5, the absolute best move. King g6 also is not playable because after b4, f5, b3, f6, b2, f7, b1 would come with a check on the white queen, or white king, I should say. So Garry puts the king on e5 correctly, and now we push our pawns down the board. We push the p. We both get queens. I play queen b4, but here Garry can take the pawn on h6. There's no longer a check winning the queen, and after, say, queen c5, king e4, a5, for example, white can probably play h4, a4, h5, and both pawns are going down the board, but neither side can probably win. So in this position, after we both queen b4, queen h6, here Garry offered me a draw, and I did take the draw, even though Garry had limited time on the clock. With a 5-second increment, I didn't think it would be possible for him to blunder, so it's a fair result. At any rate, I'm not super thrilled by the end of the game. I feel like maybe if I'd shown Garry a little bit less respect and I had been a little bit more focused, maybe if I'd played f4, perhaps I could have won the game. On the other hand, when Garry was a little bit better, he could have probably forced some exchanges and made a draw, as he said after the game when we were talking about it. At any rate, the game did end in a draw. Now, this was the only draw of the day for Garry Chess. Garry actually won both of his other games. He won, I believe, against Ray Robson, as well as the powerhouse Wesley So. Wesley, a former world champion, 960, but no match for the great inventor of this game of chess. So Garry is actually leading the event with 2.5 points out of 3. Tomorrow we'll play 3 more games. We'll see if Garry can turn back the clock for a full event. But at any rate, a very, very impressive performance for him. Myself, on the other hand, I had an up and down day. I drew all 3 games. I feel like probably I should have won one of the 3 games. I also probably should have lost one of them. So very choppy, but it is what it is. My 3 draws, of course, being against Ray Robson, Jeffrey Zhang, and Garry Kasparov himself. So at any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the St. Louis Chess 960 or 9LX event. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. I will be back tomorrow with another recap after the games. And for those of you guys who want to watch it live, I cannot stress this enough. Go to my Kick channel, kick.com/GMHikaru, if you want to watch it live. Due to the embargo by chess.com and Lee Chess, my stream outside of the St. Louis streams is the only place that you will be able to find live coverage. So make sure to check out my Kick channel if you haven't already. I hope you enjoyed the recap, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another great recap after day 2 of the Chess 960 event here in St. Louis. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your evening. Bye.